Today, I want to talk about something that is very dear to all Mexicans, which is this festivity. And I'm saying it's dear because it's something that um, puts a label on us as Mexicans, like, oh, they celebrate Dia de los Muertos, and that's like the main festivity. Well, we do have other festivities, of course. We have Christmas. It's a Catholic country, so Christmas is also important. And we have also the Eastern, the Holy Week, which is as well important. And well, other non-religious festivities such as Independence Day, not Cinco de Mayo, by the way. Cinco de Mayo is not as important in Mexico as is in the US. It's interesting, right? And I mean, it is important, but the main celebration, civic celebration, of course, is the Independence Day, which is in September 16th. But right now, a lot with the has to do with this Pixar's movie of the Coco and the importance of Dia de los Muertos festivity. A lot of the Mexican projection in the traditions is, of course, the Dia de los Muertos. And I'm going to start talking about these, that the Dia de los Muertos or festivity of the dead takes place all over Mexico. And particularly also it has a richness from her pre-Columbian native population that today, according to the Mexican government, is organized the native population on 68 recognized ethnic groups of Mexico. That's an important data. Of course, there are more, but the recognition by number, by language on their own, and different characteristics, criteria had made the National Institute of Native Population recognize 68 groups. Talking about the festivity of the dead is very important because it's one of the intangible cultural heritage of the humanity that Mexico has gave to the world. That's very important. It's not only, oh, how fun, how colorful, and how nice. No, it is also that the UNESCO, this international organization by the United Nations, recognized in 2008 that Mexico's festivity, unique way to honor the dead, is so important that is cultural heritage of the humanity. That is very important, not only in terms of recognition, but in terms of, it's not a Hollywood label. It is something that one of the top institutions in the world decided that is something to recognize. So here in this first slide, I want to make you think about the two parts of the patrimony, which is the tangible and intangible. That is something we can see physically, the representation, and something that is intangible. That is a series of practice, a series of traditions that whose representation can be or cannot be tangible. Okay, I don't want to sound too metaphysical about it, philosophical, but we have to make the difference between tangible and intangible. So as you can see in the slide, the altars, which is what most people know about Dia de los Muertos, they put flowers in altars. That's a tangible representation of that is engulfed in what is the Day of the Dead or Dia de los Muertos commemoration or festivity, okay? The altars are just a single part of this whole manifestation, okay? And here we have this beautiful picture of a homemade altar, and you can already see some of the elements that we're going to talk about it. We have food, but we have something that has called the American poison to the world, Coca-Cola, the Coke, which is something that because you do the altar to your beloved one, the altar has to contain what your deceased relative liked. And that's why we see in home altars things that they like, which was Coca-Cola. Okay, so we should also, in this presentation, tradition and modernity, we should also see the difference between an altar and an offering. An altar has levels, has different steps with specific meaning, and an offering can only be a bunch of flowers, of marigold flowers, which are the flowers, seasonal flowers for the Day of the Dead, cempasúchil, we call it, which is a Nahuatl name of the marigold flowers, which we can see here. So in the center, we see a picture of a friend of us, a family that has this tradition. They have their own chapel at home. And you can see this is an offering. It's not an altar in per se because there's no food. There's only candles and flowers. And they're singing prayers to their deads, to their deceased, their relatives. You see all the pictures. And on the other side, we see two pictures of altars placed in museums here in Guanajuato City, where I am talking to you from. Okay, so there's a difference between an altar and an offering, which is basically an offering can be from a bouquet of flowers and a candle. You are offering that in the memory of someone. And an altar is you have steps, you have specific elements, and most importantly, besides the flowers and the candles, you have food. The altar usually has food or something to eat, fruit, seeds, something eatable. While an offering is not necessarily to eat. You offer it, but not necessarily to eat, okay? In Dia de los Muertos, it's important to recognize what Mexico is. And that's one of the problems some historians and ethnologists have. Oh, Mexico lost everything with the Spaniards. No. Mexico became something else out of the Spanish mixture, what we call syncretism. And we're going to talk about that concept. The pre-Columbian and Hispanic traditions coexist in the festivity of the dead. And for example, here we have seats. This is an altar for Diego Rivera, and we have seats, which are in the main part, some of the seats, like the wheat, were brought by the Spaniards. And we see sugar skulls. The sugar was brought by the Spaniards. So how Mexican, I mean, it makes no sense from the cultural point of view to try to separate, oh, this is original, this is not original in terms of Mexican culture, because we can say pre-Columbian origin, Hispanic or Western culture origin, but together in the Day of the Dead, specifically, the altars represent this coexistence between these two parts. The Catholic priest saw a niche of opportunity in the celebration of the Day of the Dead because they knew there was another way to push the gospel into the natives by using a tradition that was so dear and important for them. Okay, the dates were changed and they were melted or at least adapted into the Christian calendar. And that's why we have All Saints Day and the Faithful Departed, which are Christian origins festivities. And The natives, of course, it wasn't that easy. Many died, as you know, from diseases. And those who survived were constantly forced into accepting Christianity. And they accepted it, but in some specific examples, such as the Day of the Dead, we can see that they still adapt their own traditions into this Christian festivity. Here we have some food that is, in my opinion, representation of this melting of cultures. We have pan de muertos, bread of death. The bread was brought by the Spaniards. The wheat was brought by the Spaniards. Here we have pozole, which is a soup made of corn. But the original pozole was a sacred soup made by the Aztecs for the priest out of the human meat of those who were sacrificed. So it was a sacrificial, sacred soup. And now we have pork pozole, chicken pozole, you name it. And that is also another element. And of course, we have tamales. Tamales in which we see pork tamales. The pork was brought by the Spaniards. And then you add chile, and then you make tamale rojo or red tamal. And that's where you have this syncretism, which is present again in Dia de los Muertos. Okay, so in one of the importance of Dia de los Muertos as a vehicle for Christianization was also, and I said, to use a niche of traditions that were so dear for the native people. And this tradition had to do also with the offerings of the deceased. Yes, they have, as it says here, a specific purpose. The specific purpose was to help them to the afterlife journey, which they were about to start once they ceased to exist in this plane and became deceased. Yes, so before entering the heaven, and this is a Christian concept or gospel concept, there's this in between, which is the purgatory. And that's where the priest used this Day of the Dead tradition into preparing the journey. In this case, it was not a journey, it was just a place to be before you reach heaven, which was, as you know, according to the Bible, when the end of times and Jesus comes and separates the sinners from the non-sinners. And in between, we are in the purgatory, which is not done yet. And that's something that the Aztecs had and pre-Columbian cultures had in between the journey. And I will refer to the traditional conception of death in the Aztecs because it's one of the main cultures, but also of who we have the most information. It's the easy one, but it's just a general overview of the death. Some cultures share the same views than the Aztecs, call it different, and had different dates, dates for their celebration and reasons. But overall, they all believe in the Mictlan, which was the underworld for them. And here we have the representation of Mictlan, which is the god of the dead, the fear god of the dead, who was fed by blood and particularly also the hearts of the victims. Also Huitzilopochtli, the god of the sun, was key in the human sacrifice among the Aztecs. But this is Mictlan, the god of the dead. The dead was so important that they even had a god to worship, to represent death. For the Aztecs, the underworld was a journey of the soul. It was a journey that had different dangers. We'll talk about them. But that is something very difficult it was something difficult for the for the priest to understand. They just thought about hell, heaven, and hell, a dual, and in between, purgatory. For the Aztecs, the cause of the death determined where you go. If you died of, as it says here, of any water-related death, drown, or a woman, or a warrior. Remember, the Aztecs were a key military society. I mean, death was there in any life of a warrior. There's death. So those who died in battle went to the Tlalocan, which the priest or the friars said, oh, that's heaven, because it has some coincidences with the water, with the eternal garden, with flowers, with a happy, peaceful place, full of food. But it's not. It was not heaven, particularly for the Aztecs. And Mictlan, the underworld, was not hell. It was an underworld that was important for anyone who didn't die of any water related death. Basically, most everyone. Of disease, as you can see, any disease, if you were old and you had life expectancy was between 50, maximum 60, but mostly 40 years old, the expectancy of life in those years, depending, of course, on the period and all that. But we know on codices, on codex, the year or the age. And by the age of 20, they were adults. Most of them married at the age of 13, 14. So you see how different it was. So the death of any non-water related will take you to the Mictlan. And that's the most interesting part, because to the Tlalocan, you went right away. Right away, you were there. But in the Mictlan, this was a journey that you had to take in order to get there. It took 4 years to reach the Mictlan, and it was an 8-state journey. And here we have again an illustration where we see, which I'm sorry, I forgot, the god of the dead. And we have also here the god of the dead shown in the Templo Mayor in Mexico City. Right there, the archaeologists found this amazing sculpture of the god of the dead, Mictlan Tecutli was. And here we have a traditional tomb or tomb for the Aztecs. You see the body was grabbed in fetus position, and it was wrapped in a cloth. It was provided mats. It was provided food. It was also with some weapons and with dogs. Okay, sometimes also archaeologists found that dogs were buried also. I mean, real dogs were buried in the tombs of the deceased, not only in pottery, but also in flesh. They were most likely sacrificed and buried with the dead. Then we have the first danger was the Apanoyan, the mighty river, that the deceased had to cross with the help of the Xoloitzcuintle, which was the Pre-Columbian dog. And here we see Dante's Coco dog, which, by the way, in the movie joins also the main character in his journey. And that's something that they took from the Pre-Columbian festivity or celebration, which is the tombs. The dogs were commonly found in the burials. And we have here how the dog is represented in one of the Aztecs codices. Okay, and this is another dog that is represented in clay found in tombs. The next journey was once stripped from the clothes, the deceased had to follow a path between two mountains that were moving and colliding. And this is where the papel picado or cutted paper was used. They buried the person also with some paper, which was made of bark, because the paper, as we know it, was brought by the Spaniards. The paper known was bark, made of bark, which is called papel amate from the tree amate. And the other danger was to cross another hill. The hills are so important in the Mictlan journey, in the journey to the next life, which in this case, this Mictlan was so dangerous. This mountain in the Mictlan was so dangerous because it was full of obsidian uh, uh, sharp flints that were there to help the in the journey. The other was to go to the snowy mountain, something feared, something respected. Yes, we do have snow in Mexico, particularly in the central plains where we have mountains, and like the volcanoes Ixtlacihuatl, for example, in close to Mexico City, Popocatépetl, which is still active, by the way, and sometimes is very feared because the ashes goes to Mexico City. So these mountains represented part of the journey, and that's why the deceased had to be buried with blankets. If it made it, because not all the deceased ones made it, that's why they had to be helped with prayers, with offerings, and with everything they need, which I call the survival kit for the deceased one. They could make this journey. And one of the most fears were these windy plains where stripped from the clothes and only with a blanket, because the deads were buried naked. They were wrapped in a cloth, but they were buried naked. There haven't found textiles in the bodies, at least in the Aztec tombs. They found the fetal position, but it is believed that they were stripped from the clothes and that everything was outside, and they were grabbed, as we saw in the other illustration. So this is the windy plains where the wind was so strong that it cut like 100 obsidian knives. I don't want to imagine that, but but I know how sharp obsidian can be. And then the seventh danger was to cross a dark water lake. Perhaps that was one of the most feared, because the lake was guarded by a big alligator. In some chronicles, they say it's a snake, but it's certainly a feared creature. And again, the dog was of great help, because the dog helped to deceive or mocked the big alligator that was a big danger of eating the deceased. And that was another danger, the lake, but the big guardian that had it. And then after all that, there was another danger awaiting, and that was a fast flowing river. And again, the dog helped to cross this. According to the chronicles, the deceased one had to swim with the help of the dog in the back of the dog, using as a savior to swim fast. And because dogs can swim fast, I guess that's when they say it's the guardian and help you to cross the river, which is very dangerous river, and it was fast flowing. And finally, after 4 years of this dangerous journey, these warriors, females and males, were given the opportunity, after overcoming all these challenges, they were able to get to the Mictlan, a place to rest forever. Now, what this has to do with real life? Well, I was reading in a wonderful book. I have it somewhere. Oh, yes. Excuse me. This is the book. This is by a wonderful Mexican archaeologist who worked for many years at Templo Mayor. He's a top Aztec specialist, Eduardo Matos Moctezuma. And he described this as the 4 years. It takes 4 years for the body to completely decompose, for the bones to remain. So there is a biological reason also on how long the body takes to, I mean, depending on the conditions, of course, but it is estimated that by 4 years, there were only bones remain or ashes. And this journey, it has to do with the decomposition of the body as well. And now the Mictlan was not heaven. It's not like I got to the Mictlan and that's it. No, it's just a place where there's no more moving. You get to the finish line, and that's where you can rest forever, okay? Depending on the death, remember. Mictlan was just for those who didn't die of something related with the water, or warriors, because the warriors, the Aztec warriors, were honored to go in, fast forward to the Tlalocan, which was another place for death. Different to the Mictlan, and not with so much suffering. It was an easy ticket. So the Mictlan is represented here in the Vatican Codex. There are about 30 codices. Some are mostly from post-colonial times. That is, they were written in the 16th century, in colonial times. So they do have the influence. It's very different. And many others, as you know, they were destroyed. So there are very few left from pre-Columbian times, and most of the codices, like the ones we see here, were written later as a request, sometimes also for the friars, like Bernardino de Sahagún, who wanted to know about the native traditions and hire some informants to tell him about it. So here we have, in this other codex, we have as well the rivers represented, and the death and the fears of the, in this case, the snake, although some chronicles refer it was an alligator, and the lord of the underworld, which was highly worshipped by the Aztecs, Mictlantecutli. And the Western influence of the Day of Death, the Western influence, as you know, well, Christianity, the gods had to be, pre-Columbian gods had to be replaced, and one of the ways to replace these gods was to turn them into demons. So they should be feared and condemned. And that is what changed the meaning of some of these gods. For example, here we see how some Christian figures such as Saint Anne and Saint Joseph, or even the Virgin Mary as the Virgin of Guadalupe, were paired to the to previous existed deities, right? And this is something we know as spiritual conquest. Others can see it as a syncretism, and other could see it as appropriation. There's different ways to see this phenomenon of pairing Mesoamerican gods. The funerary traditions brought by the Spaniards, in order to accept this for the natives, they had to accept some things as well, and also use local ingredients. And as you can see here, some Spanish regions already have this festivity of the dead that it exists in all ancient civilizations. I mean, think about the Egyptians, think about the Romans, the Greeks. Great civilizations from ancient times have worshipped the dead, the deceased. And Spain was not, of course, the exception. And in Aragon, for example, they also had candies, which are a great part of the today's Dia de los Muertos celebration, the sugar skulls, the chocolate skulls, as we see here in the pictures. And also in Segovia, they did a bread, which is, as we can see in the other picture, one of the key elements of any offering of any altar. The pan de muertos, the bread of death, which is so important. And of course, with the Spaniards came the Arab influence, which were key to understand the way the Spanish celebrated this festivity. Then, of course, I see it more than a conflict. I see it as a complementing of new ingredients, new elements, new colors, new flowers, because we also know that Western culture brought many things, including flora and fauna, and including plants and flowers. Although the local flower marigold or cempasúchil is of course is a native flower, but there we see in these altars all kinds of elements. And of course we have rum, which is, you know, post-colonial liquor or alcohol. And we have to finish the last part of my intervention, because I want to give a space for you to pose some questions. The Dia de los Muertos can be easily described as a 1,000-color celebration. Why? Because there's so many colors, first with the flowers, then with the cutted paper or papel picado, then with the candles, of course, then with the fruit, and with all the colors that you have in the bread, in the food in general, in the fruit, in everything you use, there's a colorful. And also the cutted paper or papel picado is particularly colorful. You have to combine them, or you have to and only one color altar makes no sense. It's just life. It's everything is there, and it's a joy and a celebration of life. We'll see more about that, but think about that idea. The altars of the dead are actually altars for those who live, because you are there representing what is every day in you, the flowers, the drinks, the food, everything is life and death in one simple, well, not simple, in one tradition. Today, the Dia de los Muertos is celebrated in different tangible representations. For example, this picture here shows a path or tapete. No, I guess you call it mat. A mat, sort of mat, which is made of wood, colored wood, but not the wood per se, the dust of wood. I don't know how you call it. We say acerrín. And it's colored. And then you placed all these offering in the, I guess it's just a visual joy, because here you are not particularly celebrating your beloved one. It is just a cultural tradition for the people to enjoy, for the people to see, but it does have some elements of the Day of the Dead altars. These other altars, on the other hand, we see one that has a lot of flowers, the marigold flowers, and another one that has no levels, is offering, is not representing the underworld and the different steps, which were 8 in the pre-Columbian, I mean in the Maya, in the Aztec, 8 levels. Here we have just an offering in the floor with memories of the person. For example, we have cigarettes, we have Corona, the beer, and the commemoration for the whatever this person like. And these are 3 examples of Day of the Dead celebration, but as an offering, as an altar, and as a mat or tapete. And this is another example of a pre-Columbian altar. We see here at Zompantli, which is the wall of skulls, which was when the Aztecs sacrificed the victims for the Huitzilopochtli god. They usually used the heads and placed it in a stick, in a piece of wood, and made walls on that. And this is a piece of a Zompantli, but with the cross on the top. So this is a representation of death, but with in this case the cross. And this is a representation of the anima, or the souls that are condemned to the purgatory until they reach heaven. And this is another offering made in a cemetery, where you can see different elements in the cemetery, which is another place where they do altars in the tombs, where they place the food for the deceased one, and it turns into a sort of a picnic, because you get to spend the night there with your loved one, and you get to enjoy the food, and you put a dish of food in the tomb, and you eat also from what you're sharing. Some people even hire mariachis, and bring music to the cemetery. And this is another example of worshiping the dead in a church and outside in the cemetery. And that's another something important too. Day of the Dead is not only the altars. Day of the Dead is also go to the cemetery and have this wake, I guess you call it, spend the night there, providing food and sharing food with your loved ones. And as I said, some people spend the night there. By the way, well, I'll tell that in the conclusions, but right now situation is difficult to go. So it's going to be a sad Day of the Dead because cemeteries are closed because of the pandemic. And these are another examples of Day of the Dead. We have the delicious alfeñiques, which is an Arab word, which means these sugar-made figures, usually skeletons, although now they do different types of figures. We have a lady here with copal, which is an incense, a pre-Columbian incense, very important in the festivity of Day of the Dead, along with the candles, the smoke of the underworld, if you call it, because it's particularly used in the Day of the Dead, the incense called copal. And we see also another image of this offering where you see lots of alcohol. So whoever was honored here, he had a like for the cerveza, for the beer, and for the hard liquor. And in my house, my husband likes to follow this tradition. We have an altar and a permanent altar. And in the Day of the Dead, we honor my father-in-law, which I never got to meet because he died when my husband was 8 years old, and his grandfather. But I also put some other pictures, and we dedicate candles, veladoras, which are candles in vases. I guess you call it candle vases or something, because it's just not the candle is in a crystal glass, vase. And we honor them as well, but not just to follow the tradition, it's just to remember them in our house. And finally, I want to finish with this: the preservation of the Day of the Dead festivity, not only altar, but all that is around the dead festivity, is an intangible heritage from Mexico. The altars can be in so many ways with so many combinations, and it is something that we should be proud of, but also we should be able to understand that the way we represent it is whatever you feel like it. Some people say, how can you put Coca-Cola in an altar? Well, because you are honoring the deceased one, and that person like the Coca-Cola. It's not like, oh, they're just not using the tradition properly. There's not a use of tradition properly in the private realm, in the comfort and privacy of your house. Now, today, this tradition is so commercial, has reached to be so commercial that it start the labeling of, oh, this is right, this is not right. We have to understand that it's a movable, it's a constantly evolving tradition. And I'm not here to condemn. I'm just saying this is something that is unavoidable when you are dealing with a living and moving tradition. Okay, so thank you very much for listening to my talk.